And so what do you think a Labour government will do to the UK?
Yeah, I mean, Keir Starmer has no leadership qualities whatsoever. He is devoid of any sort of charisma at all. And people do need a leader, that inspires them to a certain degree. He's kind of doing well because he's not the Conservatives, and there is revulsion. There is revulsion at them, a sense of betrayal about them. On the face of it, his manifesto on climate change is almost identical to the Conservatives. His manifesto on economics is almost identical to the Conservatives. But I think we know that what we'll see is trans ideology in the ascendancy. We'll see more legislation designed to divide us up into different groups rather than bring us together as human beings equal before the law. I look at his potential front bench of the top ministers. I see very little competence whatsoever. He's almost going to win by default, as opposed to, a big enthusiastic wave of support. And so in some ways, I think there's every opportunity for this just to be a one-term Labour government. There'll be no honeymoon. There'll be no sort of after-victory glow. He faces a big set of problems, the ones I mentioned earlier, the population explosion, the fact our public services don't work, the fact young people can't get a house and even their rents take up over half of their income. And he won't have the solutions to any of it. He's campaigning on a slogan of change, but actually it'll be more of the same, just ever so slightly worse. So here's the opportunity. The opportunity is to reshape the centre-right of British politics, to be where the silent majority actually are. Now, I know that the British Conservative Party have been around for 190 years, but nothing necessarily lasts forever. And what I'm doing with Reform UK is I am taking those stances on all of those issues that I think give us the kind of radical change that we need. And I use the word radical in an old-fashioned sense of the word. You see, I'm a traditionalist. I think that our culture matters. I think that our history matters. I think the way that we teach our kids about who we are as a people, as a nation, matters. I think understanding the Judeo-Christian principles that underpin, frankly, all of our civilization, I think that matters. And yet, I believe you can be a traditionalist whilst recognizing that your institutions need to be brought into the 21st century, and that can be done, and one is not inconsistent with the other. So my goal is to reshape the centre-right of British politics into a form that actually stands for the sort of things that you and I would believe in, and becomes electable and wins in 2029. Sometimes in life, things have to get a bit worse before they can get better.
So let me go at you with the typical leftist radical critiques, let's say, of the UK. My country, Canada, insofar as it's a good country, has principles that are derived from the UK, and they're very functional. And I read a great book at one point called The Wealth and Poverty of Nations by a guy named Landis, a historian from Harvard, who pointed out that in the Western Hemisphere, if you were a country in the modern world that was settled by France, Portugal, or Spain, you were poor. Whereas if you were a country that was settled by Great Britain with British institutions, you were rich. And that struck me, and still does, as highly probable. And so the radical leftists would say Britain has a dreadful colonial past, that the capitalist enterprise marginalizes the poor and other marginalized groups, obviously, that the time for nationalism is far gone, and you have to be something approximating an oppressive fascist to think otherwise. There's no brook whatsoever given for anything that smacks of Christian nationalism, which would be akin, I suppose, to your insistence that the nationalist project has to be embedded within or alongside the Judeo-Christian project. And so, well, those are fundamentally the criticisms. And so you said you're a traditionalist. You have a walloping flag sitting behind you. You've obviously been a staunch advocate of British sovereignty for forever, and despite remarkable odds. So case can you make, say, particularly to young people, for that serves as a barrier against the assault and accusations of the oh-so-moral radicals, but that also offers people a compelling invitation moving forward? What does reform have to offer?
Well, we believe in family, community, and country. We believe they're the three building blocks that matter to all of us, whatever age we are. And if you deny those, well, you're entitled to deny those. But it's rather important that through the education system, people don't just hear that argument, they hear the positive argument. And I think what progressivism is doing, it's confusing young people. I mean, young men are being told they can't be men. We've got England through to the quarterfinals of the European Championships as I speak. And they're being told, if you go to Germany, please don't drink too much beer. Please don't chant in the stadiums. Please don't sing songs that are funny but might cause offence. Please don't be young lads. I mean, that's effectively what we're telling people through this progressive agenda. And we're telling women, now look, what's the problem? You're in a changing room, you're in a locker room, and there's somebody there with male anatomy, but that person calls themselves a woman. So what's your problem? And then when we send a violent double rapist, to a woman's prison, we're telling women, don't complain. How dare you? That's transphobic. I mean, all this stuff does is totally confuse everyone. And then you can move on from that to the diversity and inclusion agenda, which says that companies, corporate companies, government organizations don't employ people on talent. No. You've got to fill your quotas according to race, ethnicity, sexual preference. And all we're doing here is we're dividing everybody up. We're putting them in pigeonholes. And far from bringing us together, actually all we're doing is causing ever greater division. And actually, and it goes back to your point about Landis, actually, the kind of society that we've evolved over these centuries, it may not be perfect, but you know something? It's a damn sight better than anybody else in the history of mankind has ever come up with. And, when you see that nearly 25% of 18 to 24-year-old Islamic men and women born in this country now think jihad is an acceptable principle, you realize that if we're not careful, this progressivism is going to destroy our society as we know it, lead to chaos, and make us poorer. That's the case to put to young people. And you know what's exciting? What's really exciting about this is all through my years of battling for sovereignty and borders, my supporters were over 45, over 50.